Chapter 8: Historical Research. A number of researchers, including some historians, have argued that historical research cannot be considered true scientific research because it does not permit enough precision and objectivity. Nature and value of historical research. As used by the Greeks, history meant an inquiry designed to reconstruct past events, and, in a sense, historical research can still be defined as a scholarly to discover what has happened. Under nature and value of historical research, there is chronology. Chronology can be defined as simply the describing of events in the order of their occurrence, a process similar to the older concept of historical research. Chronology is important, however, as it represents the first step in the process of historical research and provides material or data for the steps to follow. Next is importance of historical research to librarianship. In addition to fulfilling the basic purposes noted above, historical research can make specific contributions to the advancement of library and information science. According to the Library History Roundtable of the American Library Association, a knowledge of history and an understanding of historical methodology are indispensable elements in the education. Types of historical research. Hillway identifies 6 different types of historical research or documentaricity. 1. Biographical research. 2. Histories of institutions and organizations. 3. The investigation of sources and influences. 4. Editing and translating historical documents. 5. Studying the history of ideas. And 6. Compiling bibliographies. This also may be an appropriate place to note that the manner in which a historian collects and interprets his or her data may be somewhat influenced by the historical school of thought. Sources of historical information. The data gathered in historical research can come from a wide variety of sources. Among the more commonly used are the following. 1. Official records, such as laws, deeds, annual reports of organizations, charters, and so on. 2. Newspapers and other periodicals. 3. Eyewitness accounts of events. 4. Archives. 5. Manuscripts. 6. Letters and personal diaries. 7. Biographies, autobiographies, and memoirs. 8. Historical studies. 9. Literary writings. 10. Oral evidence. 11. Memorials. 12. Catalogs. 13. Schedules, agendas, and so on. 14. Archaeological and geological remains non-documents. They are considered to include the testimony of eyewitnesses or observations made with one of the other sensor by some mechanical device. Evaluation of historical sources. In selecting specific sources of data for a historical study, it is critical that they be evaluated properly. 2 types of evaluation of historical sources: external criticism and internal criticism. External criticism, or the gathering of external evidence, is done to determine if a source in fact provides authentic, primary data. External criticism often cannot prove the authenticity of a source, but it can provide reasonable confidence that a particular source is authentic. Next is internal criticism. Many old documents no longer exist in their original forms, and there is no guarantee that their contents have not changed somewhat as they have been copied, translated, and republished over the years. Basic steps of historical research. Different historians may espouse somewhat different procedures of historical research. For example, one school of thought may emphasize the collection and description of facts, while another may emphasize historical research tends to involve the following steps. The hypothesis in historical research. Indeed, the hypothesis is a natural and useful device in the historical method. More specifically, the use of a hypothesis in historical research helps to increase the objectivity of the study and minimize researcher bias. Causal hypotheses are particularly complex and difficult to establish in historical research, but in spite of being inherently difficult to deal with, causality is often thought to be important. Collecting the data. While historical research is similar to the reviews of literature which precede either forms of research, the historical approach is more exhaustive, seeking out information from a larger array. In fact, one of the greatest challenges facing the historian is the extent to which his or her research relies on unpublished materials. According to Thibault, other guides to primary sources commonly used by historians now include repository websites, bibliographical utilities, and web search engines. The presentation of findings. In writing the historical report, the researcher should take care to be objective and to preserve intellectual honesty. The report is normally directed to the knowledgeable scholar, and the facts and interpretations should be presented so the reader can evaluate conclusions in light of documented evidence. Library history. Historical research conducted in library and information science has often been referred to as library history. According to Irwin, since libraries function within a larger context, library historians should be concerned with the history not only of scholarship in its narrower sense, but of human civilization. As to the future of library history, there continues to be a need for more historical research that considers libraries and other information systems in broad contexts. Bibliographical research. Another area of scholarly work that some consider to be a special type of historical research is bibliographical research. Others would argue that bibliographical research does not represent true research, at least as prescribed by its scientific method of inquiry. Most would concede, however, that bibliographical research that takes the form of descriptive bibliography certainly comes closer to being true research than does systematic or enumerative bibliography. Systematic bibliography. Persons involved in the compilation of systematic or enumerative bibliographies are concerned with the book and other materials as an intellectual entity. The results are one of the following compilations or lists. Systematic bibliography. In contrast to systematic bibliography, descriptive bibliography is concerned with the book as a physical entity or material object. Bibliography is the study of books as tangible objects. It examines the materials of which they are made and the manner in which these materials are put together. This process can be broken down into more specific bibliographical research, including the following. 1. Analytical bibliography, which is concerned with the physical description of the book in order to determine the details of the physical process of its manufacturing. 2. Textual bibliography, which focuses on certain textual variations between a manuscript and the printed book, or among various editions. 3. Historical bibliography, which deals with the identification of original editions and the placing and dating of individual books. Other terms that are sometimes used to represent specific types of descriptive bibliography, or are used as synonyms, include comparative, technical, and critical bibliography. Those interested in examples of bibliographical research may wish to read Eaton's benchmark article in Library Trends. And lastly, the problems in historical research. A variety of problems are common to most types of research, but tend to be particularly important in historical research, including the following. 1. Deciding how much data are enough. This tends to be a relatively subjective decision. At one time, historians generally attempted to collect virtually all relevant data. They now tend toward a more selective approach. 2. Improperly selecting data. Briefly stated, the historian must avoid improper or faulty selection of data, including such tactics as ignoring some data, exaggerating others, and so on. 3. Relying too heavily on secondary sources of information. This is particularly likely in studies not dealing with relatively recent events. 4. Investigating an overly broad problem. This is difficult to avoid because the historical issues tend to be complex. 5. Failing to evaluate adequately the historical data and their sources. 6. Failing to interpret the data. 7. Reading the present into the past, even though the historical data may not support such an interpretation. Other problems in historical research and criteria for evaluating historical research can be drawn from the general research guidelines discussed earlier in this work. Those are the different topics discussed in Chapter 8. But for further understanding, let the summary sum it up. Summary. Though the methods of historical investigation can be shown to be the appropriate counterparts of the methods used in other sciences to investigate a phenomena that specially concern them, consequently, it is especially difficult for the historian to support causality within a relationship, or even to draw conclusions with a very high level of confidence. Regarding the collection of data, it is important for the researcher to draw upon primary, rather than secondary, sources as much as possible. Chapter 8 has been tackled, and I hope you understand the knowledge that this chapter trying to convey. Thank you for watching and listening.